Hello and welcome everybody. This is Sheila Kamara-Hay of Ecstatic Birth here with another conversation to transform birth. And I'm so excited today because today joining me is Laura Shanley, and she is one of my mentors and to me like one of the big birth revolutionaries out there. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. So great to be here.
I am so excited to have you here. So when I think about Laura, I have this memory of me. I had my first birth. It was fairly traumatic, and I was pregnant with my second. And I'm like, okay, I am going to take care of myself in every possible way that I can possibly think of. I'm going to learn everything I need to know. I'm going to train my body. And I was like looking everywhere, under every rock, doing whatever I could that felt really good to my body, to honor my body and my pregnancy. And I remember coming across Laura Shanley's work. Laura Shanley is one of the leaders in the unassisted childbirth movement. She's written a book by the same title. And so I get to her website, Unassisted Childbirth. And to me, it was like, unassisted childbirth, like, wow, like how could somebody have that much confidence in their own body? How could somebody like really clear their fears that well that they could feel like they're consciously choosing an unassisted birth? This idea was fascinating to me. And so I started like learning about Laura, learning about her work. And the thing that actually like had my jaw drop and blew me away was on her website, she had a tab called Your Sensual Self. And like, while I was like very much connected to my sensual self at the time, for birth, that felt really, really new to me. And I remember like there were all these stories and like, birth erotica and whoa, like my mind was blown, like sensuality in birth. I remember printing it all out. Like here were stories of women experiencing pleasure in birth. Holy cow, like this was way before, Orgasmic Birth, the documentary came out. This was way before any of this information was available online. And so when I say like Laura is a true revolutionary, like she's a true revolutionary, like she's the one that really opened the doorway for me. I remember printing out these stories and just like reading them every night, like these stories of women that could have these beautiful, empowered, pleasurable birth. I mean, Laura, you really changed my life and really the trajectory of everything I was doing. So I'm like bowing down here, so excited to have you. Like everybody, meet Laura Shanley. Again, welcome. And I don't even know where to begin. I guess I would love to just have you share a little bit about like, how did you find that spot within yourself? Because this was really like trailblazing, like bringing together sensuality and birth. I mean, in some ways, like, duh, it's obvious, but at that time, that was like as trailblazing as it gets. So I would just love to have you share a little bit about your journey and how you came to be doing your work.
Well, as far as the sensual part of it, I guess it was probably Ina May Gaskin that I saw. She had talked about that. She had delved into that a little bit. And it just instantly hit me that, of course, if birth, it's the same hormones, it's the same organs, why would birth not be sexual or sensual? And as she said, the same energy that gets the baby in gets the baby out. That just made sense to me. And then basically what I started to do was I began to collect passages. I really started looking for those passages. After I had written my first book, I thought about writing another book called Labors of Love, a collection of pleasurable birth stories. And I put the word out there that I wanted stories from women who had experienced birth as either painless, pleasurable, sensual, orgasmic. I don't know. I had a list of things that, whatever they considered pleasurable. So I started getting these stories. And actually, at the time, I didn't have a website. That was back before I had the website. And what I found was that most of the stories that I was getting were from women who had had unassisted births, because even though they may not have been planning them, because they weren't experiencing pain, they didn't realize that birth was imminent. And so they ended up giving birth unassisted. And so I took those stories, and that was actually the basis for my website. But it just, I guess, intuitively felt like, life is meant to be pleasurable. And certainly conception and sex is meant to be pleasurable. So what sense does it make that then birth should be the worst thing we ever go through. It just, and I had come across Grantley Dick Reed, and he had talked about how much fear impacts the body. This was really before I really had discovered much as far as spirituality, but just the way he laid it out about what happens when fight flight is triggered, that really appealed to my rational critical mind. Like, oh, okay, so your face turns white when you're afraid because the fear is telling your body to send blood and oxygen into the arms and legs to run from the danger or fight it. So, and it also doesn't send blood to your uterus. So your uterus is white. And so it doesn't have the fuel it needs. And so birth becomes painful and difficult. And I thought that just made such sense to me. And so, and then I began reading about the power of thoughts and feelings. That's when I discovered the Seth material and then eventually the Abraham material, and just how powerful our thoughts and feelings are. And I thought, well, okay, then then I want to create a birth that is painless and pleasurable. And I thought, oh, I'm going to go into this altered state of consciousness and then the baby's just going to fall out. I actually did have some pain. So, but I was so optimistic when I was studying this. It just made sense to me and it just felt right. And then I thought, well, if I bring anybody in, if I bring a doctor or midwife in, I'm going to have to teach them about everything that I've been learning about fight flight and about, I didn't even realize at that time what external interference was doing. How I didn't know what was happening, how much they were interfering in hospital birth and even sometimes in midwife assisted home birth because of the rules and regulations and their beliefs about it being inherently dangerous and painful. So I don't know, I know a lot of people feel like, well, either there isn't a larger consciousness, or if there is a larger consciousness, it really hasn't designed women's bodies very well, or it just doesn't, either it isn't very smart, or it isn't very caring, or it doesn't exist at all. And to me, as I began to discover my spirituality, I really began to see there is this larger consciousness, God, whatever you want to call it. And this is an incredible intelligence. I mean, sometimes just in the middle of the night, I wake up, maybe when I don't have a lot of resistance, and I think about what's going on in my body. And I think about how every breath I'm taking, how the oxygen is just going throughout my body and how my heart is beating and my food is digesting. And to me, it's like, yes, our bodies, there's something that has designed our bodies so beautifully. And the fact that sometimes things go wrong does not mean that whatever this intelligence is, it didn't do it correctly. So to me, it was a matter of understanding that there is something there, that birth is not really a function of the conscious mind. I think a lot of people believe that the ego is all that we are. That's all that we are. Well, obviously, there's something that's keeping our heart beating. There's something that knows how to grow an egg and a sperm into a human being. So I began to have tremendous respect for that intelligence. I grew up in a very medical family. My father was a doctor. My mother did medical research, and my sister was a labor and delivery nurse. I was always surrounded by medical people growing up. And as much as I feel like the medical community, there are doctors that can certainly be helpful, and certainly in emergency medicine and in other areas that can be great. But when I began to look at birth and what they're doing with birth, and I felt like, no, this does not feel right at all. And then when I began to learn about physiologically what's happening in birth, what they're doing is not based on true science. And the intelligence I was beginning to sense within myself, that voice, that internal voice, just became stronger. And I really felt like if I can just move out of the way, then that same consciousness that knew how to grow my baby would complete the process. Why wouldn't it? Why would it know how to grow the baby so beautifully without my input? As far as I wasn't telling it how to grow fingers and toes, there's something else there. And I realized we have to have something within us that knows how to turn off birth hormones, because we really could be about to be attacked. And so that we have to have something that will override that. And so that's what's happening to me. I believe that's what's happening in birth. That mechanism that we're telling our body we're literally in danger. And so our body shuts down the flow of birth hormones, turns on the stress hormones, and then we just don't give birth very easily. So I felt like if I can just not trigger fight, flight, that was really all that I felt that I had to do. Just put myself into that state of relaxation. And it really was a matter of learning how to do nothing. I really didn't focus on, physiologically what was happening to my body. Just like you don't have to understand what's happening in your body in order to have an orgasm. You don't have to know what is happening on a cellular basis or, on a cellular level. You just need to get into that zone. And so I felt I can get into that zone if I don't have a bunch of people around me telling me what to do. And most importantly, if I can just trust that my body does know what it's doing. And it just felt right to me. And I just went with it.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions for you. I guess the one that feels, first of all, I just want to reflect back that you just so beautifully weaved like sexuality, spirituality, and birth. And on one level, it's like, duh, of course, like you're bringing new life into the world. Of course it's spiritual, but spirituality and sexuality is not something that most people like can see connected in that way. And then sexuality and birth is not something that most people can see connected in that way. And I just wanted to reflect back that in your words, there was such a beautiful weaving of those pieces, which felt so, like just so right. The thing that you said about your sister being a labor and delivery nurse and always being surrounded by medical people, I'm curious about how did you navigate that, right? Because one of the biggest challenges that I see with expectant moms wanting to have an ecstatic birth or, like a pleasurable or natural birth experience even, is the voices around them, right? And a lot of times when they do have people that are really entrenched in the medical system, those voices are like, screaming danger even louder in their ear. And so how was that for you? And how did you navigate that? And what advice do you have for women that find themselves in that situation?
For me, when I didn't tell my family that I was pregnant until I was 7 months pregnant. So I had been heavy and then I had lost weight before I got pregnant. I started exercising and it was a whole life change for me when I began to sort of discover my spirituality. And I realized I was doing a lot of stress eating. And so I had lost weight. And so then when I got pregnant, I gained back the weight, and I saw my parents when I was about 6 months pregnant, and I kind of just looked heavy, and they commented, oh, it's too bad you gained back the weight. Well, then when I was 7 months pregnant, I was supposed to go to my sister's wedding, and I was like, I can't do this. And I finally had to tell them, they actually guessed when I said, you know what, I'm too heavy to go. And my sister was like, oh my God, what do you mean you're too heavy to go? And she's like, are you pregnant? So I did not tell them until I was 7 months pregnant. Well, they did not react well at all. They were terrified for me. And I really just had to let go of trying to convince them. I think they're kind and caring people, but they felt that they were basically atheists, and they just did not believe in the things I was reading about the power of thoughts and feelings. They weren't particularly interested in reading Grantley Dick-Read, Childbirth Without Fear. And what's interesting is that the first hospital to implement Grantley Dick-Read's teachings was Yale Hospital, where I was born. But my mother was not aware of it at the time. And so, but my dad had been going to medical school and he was at Yale. But my So my family, for me, it was just, I have to let go of that. I cannot convince them. It's not my job to convince them. It's not my job to convince anybody about this. Which over the years I have felt compelled to share this message, but I have learned that a lot of people are just never going to get it in this lifetime, and we just somehow have to connect with that inner voice and connect with that inner guidance. And I felt that very strongly. I felt that I had inner help. So even though I've given birth by myself several times, I never felt like I was alone. With my first birth, I actually heard a voice, an internal voice, telling me not to turn over when I was on my hands and knees. I went over to the bed, I felt the baby coming, and I thought, well, I'll just give birth on my back. I thought that's how babies were born. And I literally heard an inner voice say, don't turn over. And I didn't. And the baby, John, came flying out, and my husband caught him in midair. So for me, it was about learning to connect with that. I am a big believer in working with dreams. So I practiced giving birth in dreams. And in the beginning of my first pregnancy, I dreamt I was in a hospital surrounded by my father and other doctors, and I was in pain. By the end of my pregnancy, I was dreaming that I was at home and it was going really well. So I've gotten guidance in dreams on what position to be in. And I think we have many natural resources: visualization, affirmations, dreams, intuition, impulses. And so these are the things that I began tapping into. So it wasn't just a matter for me of, okay, I've got to let go of the medical profession, let go of that outside help, and now I'm alone. For me, it was these internal feelings, these internal resources were becoming stronger to me, so that I felt like, oh, I do have help. I'm not alone. And I do feel like our babies are helping us too, that our babies can sense when we're afraid, and our babies know how to be born. And so really it's just a matter of removing those blocks. And I think, I never did convince my family. My oldest is 42. And my daughter is now pregnant and giving birth at home for the second time. And my mother would still say, my father died a few years ago. My mother would still say, oh, I wish she would go to a hospital, So I never convinced them. And I think sometimes people say, well, I'm getting so much pressure from my family that I better, this first birth, or, this time I'm going to give it to them. And then, but somewhere along the line, there's going to be something else, whether it's extended breastfeeding, or it's choosing not to vaccinate, or it's choosing not to circumcise, or we're going to be faced with all of these challenges in our life where people just don't approve of us. And sooner or later, we're going to have to draw that line, and we're going to have those boundaries and say, my body, my baby, my choice, and this is what feels right to me. And so that's basically what I did. And I did have the support of my husband. He firmly believed in this. And we had a few friends that were supportive and did come to my first birth. But in some ways, I did lead kind of a very isolated life for a long time, because even in Boulder, Colorado, where you would think there would be a lot of people open to this, I met a lot of resistance. So I just kind of kept my plans to myself for the most part.
What's really striking me, first of all, as you're speaking, I feel like such a sense of calm over my body. And as I'm hearing your words and analyzing what you're saying, what's really striking me is that you were not fighting against something. Instead, what you were doing was you were really caring for yourself, caring for your space, caring for your inner realms. So rather than expend your energy in trying to convince or fight back, or like, you were just like, you know what? I don't even need to waste any energy there.
Right.
That it's not that it's a waste to try to convince your loved ones, but it's almost like you were so ferocious about protecting your space and your inner realm that you didn't take any of your energy for the fighting, which is actually like, that's such birth wisdom right there, right? Like, that's such birth wisdom, because the last thing you want to do in the midst of labor is to be fighting. You want to be surrendering.
Right. I mean, that is such an important point, because I have watched various people in the birth field over the past, well, really since I got on the internet, a little over 20 years ago. The angry ones don't do that well with, I understand it can be natural. I'm not saying keep your anger in, but I never wanted to go out there and attack the medical community. I have tried to be, even there are people that have said horrible things about me on the internet. And I really try to understand that they're just afraid. And I know they're just trying to help women. Most of these people don't mean, the ones that will say, actually, a C-section is really a more practical and safer way to give birth. That the human body's been poorly designed. Let's just cut everybody open. That's at the extreme. But I try to really be forgiving and be very patient, which it's taken me a while to the patience part, and I suppose the forgiveness a little bit, but it's going to take humanity a while to turn around. It's going to take a while. And I was so encouraged when I wrote my book and when I had the idea for it, and I wrote to a publisher and they were like, yeah, we want to publish your book. I was like, what? I better write it. And then it immediately was picked up in bookstores, like it was in Barnes and Noble. And I was like, wow, I'm on my way and I'm going to have a bestseller. And then nobody bought it, and then I thought midwives were going to ask me to speak at their conferences, and they didn't. And, that was like really hard for me to see that my work was not instantly embraced. And it still is not, I have had some success in the media, and my website's gotten out there, my book is still selling. But this is a slow process, and we just have to be forgiving towards people and not feel like we have to convince them. I tell people, if they do have a spouse that is not on board, print up whatever birth stories have been meaningful to you, show them that, you can show them whatever research has been meaningful to you. But ultimately, it's you have to have confidence in yourself and trust you're not alone. And we just can't, if I would have not done this until I would have convinced my family, I never would have done it because they never were convinced.
Right. And you just spoke to this piece, which I think a lot of, women that are really passionate, whether it's in birth or in other fields, like sometimes bump up against, when you do have that like revolutionary spark, when you are an advocate, when you are trying to transform something that like your inner knowing is really guiding you towards. That it can be hard and it can be a long process. And I know I see a lot of birth workers that I work with that come into my practitioner training are like so depleted from like, it's that fighting against the system. And in some ways, like if they're working in the system, they can't do that bubble thing, right? Like they can't.
Right.
So I'm wondering, like from one revolutionary to another, like what you could share about your journey in trying to like get your message out there, knowing that your message was really, it still really is on the very cutting edge, and that, some people might be ready to hear it, other people might not, but that just sharing your message is of value to the people that can. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about like how you navigated that whole realm, because there's a lot there.
Right. Well, I remember one time I was getting ready to do an interview, and this was years ago, and I was a little bit nervous. Now I'm pretty comfortable sharing my message, and I remember my husband saying to me, all you have to do is share your story. And I felt like, just being who I am and talking about just this normal kind of conversation, whatever, people are going to take from it whatever they can take. And we cannot save the world. We cannot save, even individual women. And I used to meet with a group of doulas once a month for about a year. Most of them were doulas. And every month it was the same conversation, because they were like going into the hospital and like how frustrating it was. But I think you just have to know that essentially what you're doing is you're sharing your energy, you're sharing who you are, just your presence, even if you didn't say a word, which I'm sure a lot of doulas are aware of that. A lot of birth workers are aware of that, but just your presence can have a calming effect. I mean, you're literally putting out chemicals that to me are reaching, it's like they're contagious, you know, and being as understanding as you can be of the people who are resistant. You know, I think it's so great with the internet that we can just, you know, you can put up a blog, you can share your thoughts, you never know who you are touching and how they are then reaching someone else, and how, you know, how far a message can go, even if we're not aware of the, you know, someone on the other side of the world, someone told someone, and that, you know, ultimately women have to sort of save themselves. I mean, until they decide that they're ready to hear this. But I think just knowing we don't have to be these super women and going out and saving women from the medical profession. We just have to tell our own stories, share our own wisdom. Each person has their own unique take on this. And because I have found myself over the years sometimes comparing myself to other people. And I thought, you know, with Marie Mongan, who started hypnobirthing, and she and I connected in the early 90s. We both had been so inspired by Grantley Dickreed, and we both kind of took this message, and I went in a different direction because I said, okay, well, then just do it at home by yourself. And she's like, okay, well, you can do it in the hospital. And it's like hypnobirthing took off, and I am like somewhere on the fringe where, you know, I thought, boy, if I wouldn't have just, you know, maybe if I could have just not been so, you know, or someone said to me, maybe if you could have left out the unassisted birth part. But I think everybody has to be true to themselves. Yeah. My message, I try not to judge myself by how many people I reach or how much money I have made on this over the years. Just, you know, I have a unique message. I will share that with whoever will listen. I will be forgiving towards whoever cannot, for whatever reason, listen. You know, I look at myself as a seed planter. And so if in my lifetime, I just planted some seeds, and, you know, I don't know, that just it makes me emotional, because I have felt like, oh, well, I don't have these huge trees of, you know, and here is my work. It's like, maybe it's still underground, you know, but everybody has that. If you are drawn to this work, then trust that there's a reason that you've been drawn to it, and you will impact who you were meant to impact. And just tell your story, share your message, be forgiving of those who aren't ready, and try, if you're in the system, try to work with it, try to reach the humanity within that person. You know, there is that doctor, there is some part of him or her that knows the truth of what you're saying. Try to connect on whatever level you can with that. And if you can't, then you let it go and you did the best you could.
I love that. I love that. And it really resonates with where you started, that message of like, it's not about like fighting, and there's like the inner work, right? So the inner work that I'm hearing from you right now is so much self-love, so much self-acceptance, so much affirming yourself, even when those voices come up in your own head that are like, but why couldn't you have done that or this, or maybe I should have, right? So that it's such an inner game. And I think that's really, really crucial. And I love what you said also about presence, that just your presence can shift things. And this is like a big part of the piece that, as you know, I'm so passionate about, is really helping women tap into that oxytocin flow in their body, so that when they are supporting another, if they're a birth practitioner, when they are in the birthing room, just their presence is contagious, that they can bring that oxytocin flow into their client's body. So yeah, and I think that self-acceptance, that self-love is so important. And then this piece that I also think is so important, the sexuality, the sensuality within your own body, I think can be so deeply nourishing. You know, when you're in those situations where you're not seeing what you were hoping to see or support, that sexual energy is life force energy, and it's so deeply nourishing to your body. So not only can it support your client, you know, the birthing mama with your presence, but it can also support you in that inner game that you're talking about.
Right. Just not being ashamed of our sexuality. You know, we are meant to embrace that. And the more we can embrace it in our life, the more we'll be able to embrace it in our births, and then in our connections with other people. And it's normal, and it's natural, and it's good, and it's fun. And Yeah, just try to, as much as we can lighten up as much as possible, have as much fun with this as you can.
Yeah.
Birth is a fun, creative process, just like sex is, and if you took sex so seriously, it would be hard to enjoy sex. So we have to lighten up and apply those same concepts to birth.
Yeah. Well, I am so grateful to you and your work. When you were talking about like planting seeds, I was like, I caught one of your seeds, like I could feel that seed within myself. I'm so grateful that, you've been trailblazing the way you have and you still are. Is there anything that you didn't get to share that you want to before we close?
Boy, I think, well, I have a website. You can get there by going to unassistedchildbirth.com or freebirth.com will get you there too. There's, you'll see my book there that you can get through Amazon or other places. I have a lot of stories and articles on my site. I think it can be so helpful to to read birth stories, whether you're planning an unassisted birth or not. What I have always tried to do is broaden my message. And I did used to speak at hypnobirthing conferences. Mickey Mongam was one of the few people that did ask me to speak. And I always have tried to broaden my message and say it's not just about having an unassisted birth. It's about just having a better birth regardless of where you are, who you're with. And so these concepts of self-love and self-acceptance and trusting your body, it can be helpful to read stories of women who have had unassisted birth, whether you ever plan to have one or not. So that there is help for people on my site and in my book, even if they have absolutely no interest in giving birth unassisted or even at home.
Amazing. So I'll put those links down below this video. So any of you that want to check out Laura's website and her book, and you were saying that you also do some counseling work, right?
Right. I do either, phone counseling or FaceTime. I don't advise women on whether they should have an unassisted birth. My message is really about how to overcome fear of going up against society, like you're talking about, going up against your family, going up against your own fears. And I share my stories more intimately and what worked for me. And, the research that I've done, some people feel they might put their partner on, and it sometimes just helps to hear another voice saying, all the things that we've been talking about. So they can find information about that on my website too.
Fantastic. Well, I am so grateful to you for coming here today and having this conversation with me. And I'm so grateful that, like I said, that your voice is out there trailblazing. You are an integral part of the wisdom that I share in the Ecstatic Birth Practitioner Training, which we have a new round coming up this June. And just really thank you, Laura. Thank you for everything you've done and for the ways that you've influenced and inspired me, and I'm sure countless other women out there.
Well, thank you for having me on. It was wonderful.
Yeah, lots of love, everybody.